I'm here in London, and behind me you can see St Paul's Cathedral. St Paul's Cathedral is dedicated to Paul the Apostle, the early church leader. And in the Bible we get a glimpse of Paul's life. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul writes a letter describing some of the sufferings and afflictions that he experienced in his life. He says that he was imprisoned, beaten, almost to the point of death. He talks about how he was whipped 40 minus 1 times. They didn't quite whip them 40 times because that would kill people, so it was a punishment, not execution. 3 times he was beaten with rods. 3 times he was shipwrecked. He spent a day and night drifting around in the sea. He was constantly at risk of robbers on the road, at risk of his own people, at risk from the Gentiles. He was at risk of the wild. He was often cold, sleepless nights, hungry, thirsty. Paul, in this description, sounds like a really unlucky man. But actually, all of these tribulations that Paul went through are a consequence of his life choices. He had made a choice to follow Jesus wherever, whatever, whenever, however. He was completely committed to the call of God on his life. And one of the things I love about Paul is he wouldn't have gone through all of this if he wasn't 100% convinced and confident that what he believed to be true was true. Paul wasn't someone who had a half-hearted belief. Paul was so convinced of his beliefs that he would go through all of this. And not only this, Paul was completely committed to the gospel. Paul was a man who wanted to share his relationship with Jesus with everyone. He believed that the only way to be in a right relationship with God was through Jesus Christ, and he continued to preach this despite severe and bitter opposition from many people at the time. And when we read about Paul's arrests, people stoning Paul, people whipping Paul, people beating Paul, it's because his message made people angry. But as soon as he was beaten, he would go back out and preach again. He would go back out and share again. He was never fazed or stopped by all of these different tribulations. And Paul gives us an insight into one of the sources of his strength. If you read 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 17, he says this: "These light temporary afflictions are preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond comparison." Paul had an eternal perspective, so much so that he saw all of these troubles and problems and persecutions and sufferings as just temporary, passing, and light. They're not even serious when you compare it to the incredible joy and the incredible glory that he was going to experience in heaven.